This video will begin our discussion of the element of intent. We'll do three things in particular. We'll review the tests for intent that were discussed in the previous video. We'll provide some more depth on those tests. And then we'll see how those tests were applied in the case of Garrett versus Daly. And we'll do all of this in the context of that case. So in the Garrett case, we have a woman who visits the home of her sister. She's in the backyard. At some point, she attempts to sit in a chair, and she falls to the ground and gets hurt. We know that Brian Daly, who's almost 6 years old, is also in the backyard, and there's two different versions of what happened. According to the plaintiff, Brian came up and withdrew the chair as she was trying to sit down, which is depicted here. But according to Brian, that he had moved the chair and had seen the plaintiff walk around. He had seen her attempt to sit down, and then he attempted to replace the chair to stop her from falling, but was unable to do so. So I'm going to set up the slide here so that you can approach this case from the standpoint of IRAC. Now, this case involves the tort of battery, and we've already said that a battery is a harmful or offensive contact to the person, and here the plaintiff is arguing that Brian had caused her to harmfully contact the ground, and that's what caused her hip injury. The element at issue is the element of intent, and there's really two things going on here. We do have to figure out whether or not Brian intended to cause the battery to the plaintiff, but we have to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what are the tests that we would use to determine whether or not intent was satisfied. The court does give a description of the rule, which are really the tests for intent here, and there's actually two prongs. There's two different ways that you can establish intent in an intentional tort case. One is by showing that the defendant desired or had a purpose to cause a harmful or offensive contact, and the second is if the defendant knew to a substantial certainty that a harmful or offensive contact would occur. Notice that the defendant does not have to know the precise injury that the plaintiff would suffer. That is, in this case, Brian Daly would not have to know that the woman would suffer a hip injury. He would just have to desire that some kind of harmful or offensive contact would occur, or he would have to know to a substantial certainty that that kind of general harmful or offensive contact might take place. Now, in the trial court, the court was really focused on only the first test for intent. The court said that Brian had no desire to cause the plaintiff any harmful or offensive contact because the court actually believed that Brian really just moved the chair minutes before and had no idea that she was about to sit down. So finding that Brian did not have a sufficient desire, the court thought that that was all that was necessary to dispose of the case and find that there could be no battery. But the appellate court said that what the trial court did was insufficient. Remember that battery can be satisfied, or the intent for battery can be satisfied either through a desire or through knowledge to a substantial certainty. Unfortunately, the trial court never considered whether Brian knew to a substantial certainty that when he moved the chair that the plaintiff might attempt to sit down and she might fall. So the appellate court said that this was actually fatal to the trial court's decision. The court said that it's at least possible that Brian may have known when he moved the chair that the plaintiff would attempt to sit down, and in doing so, that could give rise to the intent for a battery. The court didn't go into much detail about Brian's age, but it did note that just because Brian was approximately 6 years old, that did not create some kind of automatic immunity for him. So the court said that this case should go back down to the trial court where there should be a determination, that is a factual finding made by a jury or by the trial court about whether or not Brian knew to a substantial certainty that when he removed the chair that the plaintiff might try to sit in that particular area and she might fall and be injured. So the court remands the case back to the trial court for at least a trial on that particular issue. The court did recognize that there had been a finding of damages in the amount of $11,000. And so if the court did find that Brian did have sufficient knowledge to a substantial certainty that she would fall and suffer a battery, then the jury could award the $11,000 of damage.